You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
The Devils Burn.
An explosive film. Absolutely brilliant. ABC TV.
Superbly, frighteningly effective. Time magazine.
But of course I can prove nothing. This Mother Superior may be little more than a hysterical nun.
Exactly. Mere conjecture.
And what form does this incubus take?
The Devils is not a film for everyone. Vanessa Redgrave, Oliver Reed, in Ken Russell's film of The Devils.
Welcome back again to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. This is Annie Rose Malamet, and I'm so excited because today I'm here with Gretchen Felker Martin. I get really nervous when I say people's whole names because I want to say it right. Hi, Gretchen. How are you?
Hi, Annie. I'm doing all right. How are you?
You know, I'm really excited to talk about this movie with you. And
me too.
Yeah, movies are what's getting me through. And Ken Russell is definitely one of those directors that I've been visiting a lot in the pandemic.
Yes.
So, you know, if you haven't guessed by now, today we're talking about Ken Russell's crazy opus, 1971 opus, The Devils. So before we get into the movie, Gretchen, can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Sure. So I got my start as a film and TV critic a couple of years ago. And since then, I've branched out, and I'm now actually a full-time horror author. The Devils is maybe my favorite movie, full stop. I think about it all the time. I reference it constantly. Everyone around me is extremely sick of hearing about The Devils.
I think my entire house is sick of me watching Ken Russell movies. When did you first see The Devils? Like, tell me about your journey with this movie, since it's your favorite movie.
So the first time I ever saw The Devils, I think, was about 5 or 6 years ago. My friend Sean T. Collins, who's also a film critic, put me onto it, and I watched it basically on a whim when I was very, very depressed. And it was maybe the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. I mean, at the time I had just come out as trans, and it was so fucking cathartic to watch this like dirty, disgusting movie about people who hate themselves.
Yes. Yeah, totally. So, yeah, and in my part, I watched this movie after reading the book House of Psychotic Women, which is one of my favorite books, and Kier-La Janisse, I talk about it on the show all the time. Kier-La Janisse wrote the book, and she talks about this film in it, and at the time, now you can rent it and stream it, but at the time it was like totally unavailable, so I torrented it, and I was just like, this is fucking bananas. Like, I can't believe I've never seen this. It's a wild movie.
I feel like in some ways it kind of broke movies for me, because now everything that isn't The Devils is in some way sort of a disappointment. Like,
he does that.
Nothing goes that hard except maybe like, Possession.
Right. Yeah, and let's get into it, because the whole history of this film is pretty much just about how hard it goes. So, The Devils comes out in 1971. It's directed by Ken Russell, starring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave and some other really amazing actors we'll talk about when we get to them. So, by this time, Russell and Reed, I don't know how much you know about Ken Russell's film history, but they had established a working relationship already.
Right.
So Oliver Reed had appeared in a few of Russell's BBC productions, a lot of which I'd never heard of. Like, Ken Russell had made a film about the painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti, starring Oliver Reed, which I would like to get a hold of, which is apparently also bananas. And another movie called Music Lovers from 1970, which is about Tchaikovsky, which I had also never heard of. So they had been, and the movie Women in Love, based on the D.H. Lawrence novel, which the novel was extremely controversial, and then the film was also very controversial because...
Right, it has that famous naked wrestling scene.
Yes, because there's the nude wrestling scene with Oliver Reed, and the censors, like at the time, they cut the wrestling scene, so it actually made it dirtier. So you see these like... two naked men, and then it cuts the entire wrestling sequence, and then you see them like naked and out of breath laying together on a rug. So it's like they added more sexuality that wasn't even there to the scene, which is kind of the whole story of censorship, really.
Yeah, I think you have to be a special kind of stupid to be a censor.
Yes.
You know, it really takes sort of whatever the opposite of a knack is.
I mean, they're basically paid to like have extremely dirty minds,
right,
and interpret everything as dirty. So The Devils was inspired by Aldous Huxley's book, one of his more obscure books, The Devils of Loudun, from 1952. Have you read it or read any parts
I have.
of
It's
it?
actually sitting on my shelf right over here.
Incredible, because I haven't read it, so I'm glad that you have. And the play The Devils by John Whitting from 1961. So the story, for those of you who don't know, we're gonna blow your mind now. The story centers around the demonic possession of a convent of Ursuline nuns in 17th century Loudun, which is a city in France, a walled city in France. So these 27 nuns claim to be possessed, obsessed, or bewitched by the local priest, Father Urbain Grandier, who was kind of like a rock star at the time, like in the city. He was the city's priest in the Church of St. Croix. In actuality, this case of demonic possession was most likely politically motivated, to remove Grandier from his post. France was basically trying to get rid of all of these walled cities because they were governing themselves.
Right. They were centralizing the state.
Right. So they just wanted to get rid of him because he was preserving the city, the city's government. So
And the villain from the Three Musketeers couldn't have that.
Exactly. He could not have that. The villains in this are very good. They're so good. So Mother Superior Jeanne d'Ange, Joan of Angels, played by Vanessa Redgrave, she said that the father had possessed the nuns by throwing a bouquet of roses over the convent wall, which is just such a lovely romantic invention. These women were horny as fuck.
God, I mean, like, at the time, a nunnery is basically a place to put women you can't afford to marry off.
Exactly.
Because you can't pay their dowry.
Exactly.
So it's all the horned up third daughters of, minor nobility.
Yes. It's like horned up third daughters, ugly or disabled and deformed women, right, and dykes. So, yep. Hotbed of horniness. So Father Grandier, because of these accusations, ended up being burned at the stake. But this did not end the possessions. The commune became a tourist attraction, the convent, and the nuns' wild gyrations were put on display twice a day except Sundays. So they charged admission, and people would come and watch these nuns flip out during these scheduled times. So the shows continued until 1637, when Cardinal Richelieu, who we see in this movie too, found out about the insanity, and he cut all their salaries. Joan of Angels actually became somewhat of a rock star herself after this, and was traveling and wining and dining with the King of France. She enjoyed a very interesting life after Father Grandier was burned at the stake. So
Good.
I know. I know. I'm kind of like, at least she won. Russell had a really hard time getting the film picked up, obviously, because of its content. This was very interesting to me. So because of the way the studio system was in tatters at the time, because of, basically nobody wanted these corny studio-driven films anymore. Everybody wanted like art house, avant-garde, weird shit. So actually Warner Brothers produced this film as their attempt to remain relevant with the youth. They would never produce such a thing today.
I don't think anyone would.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right.
Like, can you imagine A24's The Devil?
It would be so bad.
Oh my Christ.
Something else interesting I learned was that Derek Jarman did the designs for the film, so he's responsible. Yeah, which I didn't know. He's responsible for all the white tile. So
right, all the like crazy, deeply anachronistic stuff.
Yes. So, which the reason that Russell wanted it like that is because of a specific quote from Joan of Angels, where she said that her examination of her testimony felt like being watched and exploited in a public lavatory. So they basically made everything look like a public lavatory in the film with the white tiles.
I never put that it looks like a fucking toilet.
Yes.
Jesus, that's so good.
The whole thing looks like a fucking toilet. Yeah, it's he's
truly the greatest. It continues to just unfold like a rotten onion.
Yeah, just beautifully. And Derek Jarman, for those of you who don't know, was also a director and a controversial director as well. He did the Caravaggio biopic. I say biopic in huge quotes. And a Sebastian movie about Saint Sebastian. He's gay. He died of AIDS. Before he died of AIDS, he made a movie called Blue, which is because he had lost his sight because of AIDS, complications related to AIDS. He made an entire film that is just a blue screen with him talking over it, meditating on life and art. The film was originally supposed to focus more on Sister Jeanne, who, like I said, became somewhat of a celebrity after Grandier was burned at the stake. So Russell cut these scenes from the script. So the movie was actually supposed to go on after Grandier is burned at the stake and be more about Jeanne. But Russell cut these scenes from the script. He wanted the movie to be more about Grandier. So Glenda Jackson, who was originally cast in the part, actually backed out of the project because she was like, I actually didn't want to play another neurotic woman in a Ken Russell movie. So she backed out, and Vanessa Redgrave was ultimately cast as Sister Jeanne.
Thank you, God.
Yes, and she's incredible in it. So this is where, it gets a little complicated for me. it doesn't, hinder how much I enjoy the film, but it is something to talk about, is just how Ken Russell was so famously abusive to his actors. And especially during the nun orgy scenes that were being filmed, like he did not properly brief the actresses on what would be expected of them. They were kind of expected to like be in these, when they were shooting those scenes, be in like sexual hysterics for like 5-7 hours at a time. There were the male extras kept groping them and harassing the women while they were shooting. And Ken Russell just kind of like famously would rile people up to get the performance he wanted, much like Kubrick does. So there's a lot of, Judith Paris, who plays, what's her name? She's the nun who's watching Mother Joan.
Right. I know.
Yeah, and who has to jerk off the big candle in the church.
Yeah.
Which one reviewer called a very popular church candle, which I thought was so funny. Yeah, she said it was just like not, like the working conditions were just not good, and that the women felt very exploited on set. Right. Which just sadly does not surprise me at all. And, so I read a book about the production by Richard Krause, and I found it interesting how in that book, it's, these things are talked about, but they're also kind of dismissed as like, well, this is such an amazing movie. It's like, does it, what do we say about that? Because like, thank God the movie exists. And
I think I was just thinking about this the other day. I saw Repulsion for the first time, which, is an incredible movie. I was really blown away. And I really sat and thought for a long time on it afterward, on the issue of how it lines up with Polanski's own actions. And I came to the conclusion that really, like, this insight into women's suffering is just another thing for them to flex. And ultimately we really prefer their insight to like the actual suffering of women that typically must occur for it to exist.
Right. Yeah.
And like I said, or like you said, I still love this movie. It doesn't take anything away from it for me, but I try to be conscious of the fact that it's something that is in part about like female repression and pain, and it also contains that mixed into its foundation.
Right. And something that I found interesting on this rewatch, because I was watching it remotely with my partner, and she was saying that she just wished that there was more scenes between the nuns to flesh out their characters, or to have more interactions between them, or that it was more focused on the nuns, which I think could have ameliorated a lot of these issues if these women weren't just being used as like meat for this orgy scene. Anyway, so The Devils received significant critical backlash upon its release due to its outrageous, overheated, and pornographic nature. The film was publicly condemned by the Vatican, who, though acknowledging that it contained some artistic merit, asked that its screenings at the Venice Film Festival be canceled. Critics
imagine a better endorsement than being protested by the Vatican.
Oh yeah, that would just make anybody want to see the movie, especially in 1971. The critics lambasted it. George Melly in The Observer alleged, instead of contrasting the use of political power with the hideous pantomime it promotes to gain its ends, the whole film is a hymn to sadomasochism. It is vulgar, camp, and hysterical. And I said, and that's why we love it.
Right. I'm going to take a second here to say that I know George Melly, and I've read a bunch of his work, and he's a fucking drip.
He's a hater.
everything he does is just like, well, this movie suggests that a bad thing is fun. And it's like, George, you want to do something like other than drink a tall glass of milk and go to bed in a, separate room from your wife. Like, just go to therapy. Stop
Go to
reviewing
therapy,
movies.
George. Yeah.
I mean, I think he's dead now, but fuck him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing that's funny about it is like reading the reviews, it's just like people agreeing with the Catholic Church. And Pauline Kael hated it too, which I'm not surprised. She kind of hated most things. I think she just hated men, though. I think she was just like, this man's movie. Like, I don't care. And Bridget Byrne of LA Weekly said the film is brilliant, audacious, and grotesque, and that audiences have to grasp its philosophy, work out the undercurrents of seriousness, close the structural gaps for themselves, even as they are transported by a literal orgy of splendor. I said, a girl after my own heart.
Yes, honestly.
The film was
we love
to see it. Thank you, Bridget. The film was heavily censored. Much of the orgy scene was cut, among other things. And an extended version was released in 2002, which is probably the one that we're watching, but it's still not the full version. The final cut of the film is languishing away, unreleased by Warner Brothers. Russell wanted to release it back in 2011, but he died before he could accomplish that goal. The film received an X rating at the time, which means no one over 18 admitted, and was compared to A Clockwork Orange and Straw Dogs.
No one under 18.
Right. No one over 18 admitted. No one under 18 admitted. And yeah, which I find those movies to actually be a lot more cynical than this movie.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about the contrast with The Exorcist, right? Because The Exorcist gets released in 1973, and it has a lot of controversy as well, but it doesn't receive the critical and institutional backlash that The Devils does, simply because The Exorcist endorses the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Exorcist is a story about coming back to faith.
Right.
And using it to crush a prepubescent girl's sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. And
pretty appropriate.
It's, like the movies are both horrific and graphic, but The Exorcist is remembered as a classic because of its pro-Catholicism. So now let's talk about the plot. And the first thing we get when this movie opens is the King of France putting on a play for an audience, a small audience, in drag as the birth of Venus, and is wearing a shell bikini. And I just wanted to discuss this, and I wanted to get some of your thoughts about why the movie opens this way.
I mean, I do think that part of it is just like kind of this staid idea that indulgence is homosexual, it is flamboyant, it's transgressive in these sort of like elitist ways that you don't see among normal folk. Because the whole court is packed with I don't know how they identify. I would
faggots
say,
and trans people. Yeah,
right. It's all faggots. There's a bunch of men in like arsenic powder and big wigs and dresses, calling each other provincial bitches and mincing around, and it's wonderful. I love it. Those are my people.
Yes.
And I truly do not think that it's entirely mean-spirited towards gayness. I think, that movie flatters no one.
No.
it certainly does not make straight people look like bastions of morality.
No, I mean, except maybe I feel like the only person who gets to, kind of emerge at the end is Madeline,
Right.
with some, or some empathy. I'm a depraved pervert, so I have empathy for like everyone in this movie except the male villains. But I know that it's not really supposed to be viewed that way. Like everyone is supposed to be corrupt. And yes, this is like the excess of the king, who, I mean, I think this is also historically accurate. Like this King Louis did put on these drag performances.
Right.
Yeah. So,
even if it's played up, it's not wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and also Ken Russell just kind of has an obsession with gay people. Like there's a lot of this in his films. So, in the Tchaikovsky film as well. So Cardinal Richelieu offers his hand to the king in this scene, and he's hoping they can form a union between church and state, and may the Protestants be driven from this land. And
I think about Ken Loach's delivery of that line just every day. It's so fucking nasally and funny.
Yes.
I love that Ken Russell's film of the Devils credit that appears over their faces as they stare at each other.
With the smarmy red text. And
so good.
The ominous Maxwell Davies score also is so good. And like, of course, in true Ken Russell fashion, we immediately cut to a very horrible image of a corpse decaying and like spinning on a wheel outside this walled city. This is a murdered Protestant, and we are now, thrust from the glamour and splendor of the court into the abject poverty of these people's existence. So,
right, and I think during this part, we meet Baron Labardemore, who's driving a bunch of Protestant indentured workers towards Loudun to tear down the walls.
Yes, you're right. So it's a group of Protestants, right? And they're being like forced to pull this carriage. And we're told now we cut to the city of Loudun, and Father Grandier is speaking. He's addressing this crowd at a funeral procession. Who is the person that died? I'm forgetting.
It's the Lord Governor of the city, and I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
I want to say it's George something.
But basically what's happening is this guy died and Father Grandier is kind of taking over.
Right. And this guy was formerly the sole obstacle to the city's absorption by the French state.
Yes, he fought.
Because he had a relationship with the king.
Yeah, he had a relationship with the king, and he requested of the king that the walls remain. He's also saying the religious wars are over. Protestants and Catholics shall fight no more. Obviously, because Catholics have won. And the speaker, Father Grandier, we meet now Oliver Reed as this hot priest. He's got the mustache. He's got this long hair. I mean, this is Oliver Reed at his peak, this film.
Yeah. My friend Julia Graffair and I once talked so hornily about Oliver Reed in this movie that multiple people got up and moved away from us on the train we were on.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, he is that bitch in this movie. And immediately we see all these nuns like freaking out in the convent, trying to get a glimpse of him like he's an actual rock star. The nuns, can you describe a little bit how their convent looks? Like, we talked a little bit about the white tiles.
Right. So the nuns' convent, most of the rooms have sort of this domed ceiling that makes all the sound very echoey. Every interior is completely covered in white tiles. There's bars everywhere. it looks like a combination between like a locker room and an insane asylum, which is basically what it is.
Yes.
And it's just full of these women who are insanely horny for this hot priest. like fighting to get a look at him.
Yeah, fighting to get a look at him. We meet Sister Jeanne, who's the Mother Superior, and she's played by Vanessa Redgrave. She has a deformity which causes her to have a quote unquote hunchback, just a spinal deformity. So, which is a very important part of her character. So Sister Jeanne, she admonishes her fellow sisters, but she crawls into this like little crawl space where there are these
little Sister Jeanne shaped room.
Yeah, and there's this like basement window, basically, like it's at street level, and she's looking through the bars of this window, because every window in the convent is barred, and she sees Father Grandier for the first time. And once she sees him, she falls into a reverie, and this is where her visions begin. So what's Sister Jeanne's first vision?
So this is one of the most important parts of the movie to me, if not the most important. Her first vision is of Grandier as Christ standing in the center of this crowd, and she approaches him with her hair unbound, and she has this incredibly long, beautiful red hair, and she kneels down and starts to wash his feet with it. And she's licking the blood from the wound left by Longinus in his side. And it's just like, it's so ecstatic. It's so perfectly emblematic of the way that the Catholic Church sublimates sexuality into ritual, and into repression on purpose, to create like a stronger bond between itself and its believers. But anyway,
because it's a cult. Anyway,
right? It's like and then a gust of wind exposes her hump, and the crowd starts to jeer at her, and she becomes panicked and gets up and starts reeling from face to face, and she's screaming, "I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful." And then we cut back to her lying on the floor in this little locked closet, praying for God to take away her hump. And that's really the only time in film that I've ever felt like something that only I had felt was on screen.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about why this scene is so significant for you?
It's the combination of this sort of self-regard and almost, I don't want to say narcissistic, but there's this image of herself that she has learned to project in order to survive. And that image of herself is beautiful. She says it repeatedly throughout the movie. She has a face like an angel. If Grandier could only see her.
Yes.
And
she does. She's so lovely.
And she does. She's unbelievably attractive. But in her heart, of course, she would like to look like other women and not have this deformity. And I think, to me, it speaks very strongly to the parts of me that are mired maybe forever in wanting to look cis or just not stick out anymore and not be a freak. Even though those are things that I love about myself.
Right.
And that I've taught myself to love. And it's that intersection of intense emotion at the crux of appearance.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. And I think
it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many women can relate to this. Like, I myself, as a fat woman, understand this as well. I think it's just like, yeah, it's abject. It's very, clinging to this kind of narcissism. I mean, I love that they show that about her character. She's such a complex character. Like, she's obviously very oppressed and denigrated. I mean, I can't even imagine being someone with a deformity in the 17th century. And yes, like these things that she has learned to do to survive. And part of that is this like cruel mother superior identity that is being like shattered by her own lust. And it's just a really intense performance. So now we see Grandier with his Latin student, Felipe, or is it Philippa, who is also his lover. So we learn that he's not a very moral priest. And the real Father Grandier was not as well. He was a womanizer in real life. Which is part of why these accusations happened in the first place, which is kind of a really funny, like, reverse slut shaming, honestly.
Right. Like, his political enemies needed somewhere to get their fingers in, and he provided.
Yes. And, not that every other priest wasn't also doing this.
Right. There are all these famous decrees from the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries that are like the kings of various countries being like, okay, priests, you have to get divorced. You have to stop openly having a bunch of mistresses.
That's so funny. Yeah, Father Grandier talks about this in the film too, and I believe he talked about this in his writing as well. Basically about how the church doesn't want priests and nuns to get married because then they could own property and land and give it to the Catholic Church wants everything to belong to them. So it's right. So they were aware of that even at the time. So yeah, he was too subversive in his thinking for them. We also learned that his lover, Felipe, is also pregnant. And Grandier is a huge fucking jerk to her in this scene.
Such a dick.
Yeah, he's like, what do we learn about him through this conversation?
I think we see a lot of like fatalism and sort of resignation to his own corruption. Because he emotionally detaches from her literally the second she tells him. I think he says, and so it ends, and then kisses her on the forehead and gets out of bed.
Yes. He's like, but it was beautiful, wasn't it? When we had it, it was beautiful. And she's like, I'm literally fucking pregnant.
Right. And he's like, it's so sad that we'll never see each other again. Well, goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's like just fundamentally a guy who walks away and does not finish shit.
Yes. Yeah, and he says that at the end too. He says he's had a vain and disordered life. So Grandier is called by a woman to her house. We later learn that this will be Madeleine, where her mother, who has the plague, is being quote unquote treated by these quote unquote doctors with
right. I think it's the chemist and
the butcher,
the botanist. Right.
The chemist and the butcher.
And they're fucking insane. I mean, they're always like babbling each other's sentences and doing unbelievably atrocious things to people. And admittedly, at the time, a doctor was basically just a guy who could murder you and it wasn't a crime.
Like horribly, like through torture.
Like they're in their own class. I think when we meet them, they are pressing heated glass full of wasps to this woman's flesh. And like, if I recall, the theory behind this treatment is basically homeopathy, that like, well, we'll just give her some of like this poison to get the poison out of her.
Oh my god. And they also have like a mummified crocodile, which
Yep.
like, we're unsure what that's for, but it's there. And you know, Grandier also part of, I forgot to mention in this scene, is like there's just horrific scenes of like plague bodies being burned on pyres and thrown into mass graves. So the
At
plague,
this part, the city really, really looks like hell.
yes, it
Like
does.
it's explicitly infernal. The streets are full of fire and corpses.
Yes. Apparently the actors' makeup for the plague bodies was so grotesque that they were not allowed to eat at the staff restaurant or at the crew restaurant because people were so disgusted by them, which I think is so unfair. Like,
That's hilarious.
I know. But these poor people basically had to like lay on top of each other in a mass grave for hours covered in fake blood. And these, and, I know, and these wasps were actually landing on them and shit. So it was hard for them to keep still and pretend to be a corpse. That just sounds insane. I mean, because they're really like piled up there too. Like it's not a few bodies. Like there's
It's like hundreds.
yeah, exactly. So Grandier, he throws a fit. It's seeing these horrible doctors. He throws the crocodile out the window in a rage. The woman dies as Grandier prays for her, and then Grandier prays with Madeleine, and so their meeting occurs. Their meet cute, if you will. And now Grandier's lover's father, so Philippa's father, who is the magistrate, is also tearing through the plague-ridden streets, hell-bent on beating Grandier's ass, and they have a wild fight with the crocodile.
Yeah, Grandier breaks his sword using the stuffed crocodile that he threw out the window. And he, as he walks away, he utters perhaps the most fucking legendary line I have ever heard, where the guy shouts after him, "I'll see you in hell." And Grandier just laughs and goes, "On a living pavement of aborted bastards, no doubt."
So yeah, he has really good lines in this, verging on just like complete comedy, like that one. I mean, there's a lot of really funny parts of this movie, which are very intentionally funny, which I think at the time was misinterpreted as camp or like being over the top, but is actually meant to be a dark comedy.
Right.
So in the day, Grandier is walking around blessing the bodies of plague victims. This is when we meet Father Mignon, and he chastises Grandier for fucking his cousin, for fucking Mignon's cousin. He's like, "You have so many whores and mistresses. Like, did you have to fuck my cousin?" Which is, fair.
And Grandier's just like, "Yes, shut up, you little bitch."
It's really funny. Yeah. So Madeleine watches on. She's obviously into Grandier. She goes to Mother Jeanne and talks to her through the bars of the convent. And I love the scenes where Jeanne is talking to Madeleine through the bars because
they're so good.
She's just like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like she's behind these bars, but you feel as if you're talking to some kind of like god or like oracle, like the way that she's presiding. Yeah.
Her body language is so like languid and uncaring.
Yes.
And she really does like demonstrate a lot of effortless mastery of scripture and theology too. And like, plays with Madeleine very effectively, is obviously a lot quicker than her and better informed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great scene.
It's a great scene between those two actresses. And she asks if she can join the convent, and Jeanne like kind of mocks her. Like, of course she's jealous of her looks, but also Madeline is kind of stupid. So
Yeah.
she you know, she's like this, yeah, she's just like not having it. And she tells Madeline, she's like, you know why we're here, right? Like, most of these women don't have money for dowries, or they're too ugly to get married.
Right.
And she gives her a book by Angela Merici, the founder of the Ursuline Order, and tells her to read it and come back. So Grandier tells Madeline that she'd better not join the convent. He mocks their order. Typical man shit. I mean, he also just like doesn't believe that people should. I don't think he believes even that he doesn't believe women should be cloistered like that.
He doesn't believe anyone should be cloistered.
Yeah, exactly. So Felipe cries to Grandier in church during her confession, trying to get him to care about her being pregnant and having their child. And Grandier says, if God wants you to suffer, then you should suffer. Come on.
Here's like an interesting thing about Grandier is that he knows that the way he lives is shameful, and he still tries to be like a very upright figure in public, and like a really principled priest when he's in the role of priest. But he has absolutely no patience for anyone else who questions that like obviously split life.
Yes.
He just dismisses them immediately. Like, can't you see it's very disrespectful to talk in this church about how I fucked the shit out of you?
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's, I mean, you know, I think Ken Russell, in a way, you know, he's creating this ambiguousness where no one is really innocent here. And, you know, almost kind of like the ending scene, which we're obviously going to get to, is so horrible with the Father Grandier burning at the stake. But also, like, this woman, you know, at the end we see Felipe like laughing at him burning at the stake. He was horrible to her. Like, it's, you know, and Russell kind of like holds space for all of that in the film. So next he takes Madeleine's confession, and I love this scene. She tells him she's suffering from pride because, you know, she was pleased with herself for caring for plague victims. And Father Grandier says, you know, God wants us to take pride in our work or feel satisfied with our work. And she also tells him that she's had unclean thoughts about Grandier. And then she says my favorite line, which is, destroy me, I love you.
Him.
Yeah, destroy me, I love you. Him. Like, she's talking about some man she's obsessed with. He knows it's him. And she's like, she just blurts out in lust, like, destroy me, I love you, him. It's,
she does it so well. It's like, it's a perfect delivery.
Yes, it's just like full of lust. You know, she's talking about how she needs to be touched. And he tells her to go to his house and wait for him because he's a cat. Yeah. He's like ready to go. But this scene is so interesting because when he goes to the house to meet her, she's praying and asks her what she wants from him. And she says that she would not be afraid to go before God with him. And he says that she's shaming him and tells her to leave.
Yeah, he's very like fatalistic here, very bleak, but he talks about basically the mixed deal of having an affair with him. Like, there will be some love, there will be some joy, but it will be a lot more misery and, you know, sweaty sheets and tangled limbs. It's a beautiful scene. There's a lot of very good dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it basically just shows that this man was really conflicted about, you know, he presents this image of being so sure of himself and so commanding, but as does pretty much everybody in the movie, except
Mhm.
Madeleine. But behind all of that, everybody is very unsure of themselves and,
Right.
you know, mired in shame and self-hatred. So back with the nuns. Oh, and when she leaves, Grandier says, "My God, help me. I love this woman."
Yeah, that was quick.
That was so quick. I just assume that this is accurate because everybody's life was shorter. Everybody was like, all right, well, I'm in love now. So
Right.
back with the nuns, Jeanne, I love this scene. I'm just going to say that about every scene. Jeanne is like leading the ladies in prayer. This is when she's like shuffling on her knees between the two lines of the nuns. Like they're all lined up on their knees praying, and Jeanne is quote unquote walking down the aisle between them, but she's shuffling on her knees.
Right, towards that enormous grotesque crucifix.
Mm-hmm. And she has another vision of herself with Grandier, where she is at this time she's at the foot of Jesus's cross as he's dying. And suddenly Jesus becomes Grandier, and he comes down off the cross and walks to her, and she licks his stigmata. She licks the stigmata in his hands. She licks the wound in his side, and they kiss passionately. And the scene is also intercut with Jeanne in the convent, like tormented by these visions.
Right, she starts to jam the end of her rosary, the cross at the end of her rosary, into her palm until she like digs a furrow into the skin.
Yes,
It's really a disgusting injury.
Yeah, creating like a stigmata wound in her hand as she's fantasizing about basically having sex with Grandier in the dirt while he's Jesus. And Grandier, so like her vision ends and we see that she's got this wound, and Grandier, you know, back in Bliss, Grandier and Madeleine discuss marriage and whether priests should be able to get married. And this is when we hear Grandier's, all of his thoughts about how priests should be able to get married. He says, "I take the words of my creator as gospel. It isn't good for man to be alone." You know, he insists there's nothing in the Bible about priests or nuns not being able to get married. And Grandier, he then theatrically interrupts the demolition of the city walls by the Baron. How do you pronounce his name?
Labodomore.
Labodomore, okay. And he brings these soldiers with him, these Luden soldiers, and he insists that he's in charge. There's not going to be any demolition. And then we get this scene with the king and Cardinal Richelieu, which kind of explains what's happening here, right? They don't want the cities to be self-governing.
Saint-Marc, that's the governor's name, Georges Saint-Marc.
Georges Saint-Marc, okay. And yes, this is when the king says, oh, that he had an agreement that he wasn't going to tear down the city walls. This is a power grab, right? And there's also this bizarre Blackbird scene where there's a Protestant like dressed as a blackbird is released from a cage. He like obviously can't see anything because he's got this like big blackbird head on, and the king shoots him and says, "Bye-bye, Blackbird."
Right to the camera, I believe.
Yeah. Exactly. Something that was funny.
Fucking good.
It's so good, but like a lot of the people in the production, Russell fought to keep this line because a lot of people wanted this scene eliminated because they thought it was corny. But I find it hilarious.
Very funny.
Yeah. Jean writes to Grandier to be the father confessor for their convent, which is like basically a love letter. And some people think in real life that Grandier's rejection of Jean to be the father confessor led to these accusations.
Here's the thing. I think there's a pretty good chance he actually fucked her and she got mad that he didn't want to keep doing it.
Yeah. Probably.
Like
That's a
that
really good chance.
Like a dude who everyone falls in love with, that's like at the edge of plausibility. But a dude who just fucks whoever he wants without really caring about how they feel is much more likely.
Absolutely. Yes. No, I stand with Jean. I think I think that probably did happen. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I'm sure he fucked a lot of nuns in that convent. So
yes.
So Jean masturbates violently.
Does she ever?
Does she ever? As this other nun kind of like listens in, giggling. And
the other nun does such a good nonverbal performance there, because she goes from like titillated to like breathing heavily and unable to look away. And it just like, it's so good. And it's such a good scene about like the nature of that kind of masturbation where you're trying to like quell something that is interpersonal.
Yes.
And it also leads to some of my favorite dialogue in the movie when she gets up and scourges herself afterward. And later Grandier talks about what's the flagellation as something that's fundamentally sexual, because if you do it when you're having impure thoughts, you're going to create a stronger and stronger resonance between that sensual experience and those thoughts. And the only possible outcome is that they get tangled together inextricably.
And that, ladies and gents, is why we're horny for pain. Yeah, it's perfect, right? Like that, this happening with that conversation later is, yeah, it's great. It's, I mean, it also, this being intercut with, the marriage, to his secret marriage to Madeleine is so heartbreaking. And there's a lot of parallel cutting in this film where you see two scenes happening at once so that we conflate them. And you know, Madeleine, she doesn't just flog herself, she flogs herself with a chain flogger.
Right. It's fucking like spiked iron.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that that's one of the things that was cut, was like actually seeing that happen, because you just see her hand going for the flogger. So those two creeps are also watching the wedding, the chemist and the butcher. And this fucking scene where Cardinal Richelieu is being pushed by these nuns in his like little cart as he's talking about how to destroy Grandier with the Baron, and so that Loudun can be demolished. The nuns play act Grandier's wedding, which is queer as fuck.
Yes, it very much is.
These two women.
I think one of them is lamp black for his beard and mustache.
Yes, there's one woman with like a fake beard and mustache drawn on, and another woman playing Madeleine, and all of the nuns are, you know, this is like a harbinger of things to come with these ladies. Madeleine goes, and Jean watches on like destroyed, right?
Right.
So Madeleine goes to see Jean again, and
actually, I think beforehand, but just before that, the father confessor arrives, and Sister Jean is like, "Oh, it's Grandier. He'll be able to explain everything." And she like runs off in ecstasy, and then it's Father Mignon.
Yes, I actually think that happens after she bites Madeleine.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. So what happened? Yeah. So she's like spits through the bars at Madeleine, and she like bites her also and calls her a whore. Yeah. And this is when, so she has an illicit mirror, right? Like these ladies aren't supposed to have mirrors. So she has this tiny little mirror, and she's looking in, and this is the scene where she's looking in it, and she says, "If only he had seen me first." Right. And she's talking about how her face is beautiful, like an angel peeking through the clouds. And I just love I love that. I just,
It's fantastic.
yeah, like the way that she sees herself. And this is when somebody tells her that the new, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's like this kind of self-regard that is based explicitly in not having what you want. Like your beauty is an extension of your victimization. It's proof.
Right. And Jean, so this is when Jean thinks Grandier has come to be the father confessor, and she runs to him in joy, but it's fucking Father Mignon.
Yeah.
And-
This little pinch-faced lemon man.
And she's like, "Where's Grandier?" And he's like, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm the new father confessor." And Jean tells Mignon that Grandier has possessed her, filling her with obscene thoughts. And then my favorite,
Fucking Vanessa Redgrave's delivery, where Mignon asks her, "What is the name of this possessor?" And she gets really, really close to him and then shouts, "Cock!" And then, like, sags over, chuckling, and goes, "Oh, Grandier." Like, now I'm just watching.
cock. Yeah, it's just like she's never said this out loud before. I mean, yeah, she's in like complete hysterics over her lust. Like it is uncontrollable at this point.
Right.
Felipe is examined nude by her father and the chemist and butcher, also plotting on Grandier's downfall. And so now that she's pregnant, it kind of bolsters Jean's accusations. This is like also a wildly staged scene. I don't even know where they are. They're
in like some sort of like indoor arboretum dungeon.
right. Yeah.
It's completely crazy.
Yeah, I know.
There's
And
like
she
a
has
spotlight
like
in the middle.
there's a spotlight. She has like an obvious merkin.
Right.
The Baron agrees to investigate Grandier, but he says they must send for Father Barre. Oh,
Yes.
yes, another one of my favorite characters. I forget the actor's name.
unfair
What
that
is his name?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Oh, I just forget the actor's name. Michael Gothard. Or Gotard.
Yeah. It really, really sucks that he basically got drummed out of acting by how much everyone hated that role because he's so good.
He's really good in it. And also the cutest guy in the movie, dare I say?
Cutest for sure.
Yeah, like Oliver Reed is the hunk, but
Right, but
he's a cutie.
Michael Gothard is he's pretty. He's very pretty.
he's very
He has
pretty.
the big pouty lips.
I know.
and
I'm like,
the
I
high
just like him because he looks like a girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Oh my god, he would look so good in drag.
He really would. So they send for Father Barre, who's like a professional witch hunter. And this Michael Gothard plays him wildly. And
Yeah, he plays him like he's fucking like Axl Rose. Like,
yes.
when he shows up, he's like, "It's me. I've arrived. The event is here."
Yeah. And Father Barre, he questions Jean. Jean makes some things up, talks about her visions, how Grandier was accompanied by 6 creatures, how the nuns were forced to make an obscene altar of themselves and were worshipped, which I think is a very telling story to make up.
Yep.
And as she tells it, she's going into these reveries, and the Baron is skeptical. Father Barre, he's like, this guy's a creep, but I don't think he's possessing nuns. And Father Barre insists on an examination, which is basically just torture, right?
Right. They basically rape her.
Yeah, they rape her. Where the doctor, they doctor freaks inspect Jeanne, and they say like, she's been had, she's not a virgin. It's like, okay, well now that you like
I'm the gigantic douche sprayer full of boiling water.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and she's like laying on the ground bleeding in pain as she watches them prepare the holy enema, which is something that people actually did. Where
I think,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a scene where you do find some characterizations for the nuns who rush to her defense, and it's really moving.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is
they're like, all right, she's a crazy lunatic, but like you can't do this to her.
Right. And this is when they all start psychosomatically like becoming like a hive of chaos, right? Is like the trauma of watching their mother superior be raped like this.
Right.
It's very Salem witch trials, like all of the women kind of, connecting psychically on that level. And they give her this enema, this gigantic metal device filled with holy water, which looks like it's boiling. And they hold her down and they give it to her, and she tries to recant her confession, what she said about Father Grandier. She's realizing now what this actually means.
This is like going too far.
Yeah. And she bites Father Barre, but it's too late. And everything descends into madness.
Right.
So the men, as everything is descending into madness, the men are discussing already charging admission to watch the nuns' theatrics.
And I believe at this point, Grandier is either about to or has just departed the city to have an audience with the king.
Right. So Jean ends up, confirming that Grandier is her tormentor. But this is actually when Madeline and Madeline and Grandier are in their marriage bed.
Right.
And he's leaving for his audience with the king. He says he's never seen Sister Jean. Grandier, he says to Madeline, the nuns are secluded. They've given themselves to God, but they still crave men. And this is also his, he's like, of course this would happen. They're horny as fuck, basically.
Right. And this is when he gets his lesson about masochism.
Yeah, this is when he talks about pain being connected to sensuality. The nuns are rounded up in the woods by Father Barre to be executed. But then he has a vision. And he says it's not all their fault. They're all possessed by Grandier, just as Jean is. It's really nuts.
Yeah, and he implies to them in a just barely deniable fashion that they had better start acting possessed.
Yeah, exactly. So, and they get the memo, and now we get the nun orgy.
Where does it go?
Lord, the nun orgy. This is another scene that's parallel cut with Grandier and Madeline by the sea, kind of having this very serious, conversation or contemplating life,
I think this is just Grandier riding back to Loudun.
Okay, yeah. And
but he talks about feeling at peace and like understanding his place with God.
Right.
And meanwhile, the convent has become like this gyrating meat tornado.
There's just a lot going on here. It's like impossible to talk about the scene in a linear manner. There's this insane nun orgy. All these nuns are like naked and writhing. The doctors are like examining nuns' vomit comically. They obviously have no idea what they're talking about. They're like, here's a child's left ventricle of a heart.
Right.
Here's a human tooth. And then this guy is like, what's that? And the other guy is like, well, that's a carrot. And it's like a very funny scene.
Really
and the king is there. And
he shows up in disguise with a phylactery that he alleges is full of Christ's blood. And Barre takes hold of it and is like, it will set all the demons to flight, and all the women lose their minds. And then the king reaches out and is like, you dumb bitch, there's nothing in it. And everyone just keeps going.
It's so funny. The king has great tights on, and
yes.
he's also like talking to his little like cadre of fags, like
right.
One of which was played by Twiggy in drag. And he's like, don't touch them dirty things, like referring to women. Like, right. It's, I mean, and then what else is happening? Like, well, first of all, when I was watching this, I was like, well, this is me post-COVID immediately.
Right.
And there's like, okay, so there's like a nun jacking off a candle.
They pull down the crucifix and molest it.
Yes, they which fuck is the Christ statue. Which is the most controversial scene in the movie and is referred to as the rape of Christ.
Fuck me. Yeah, but just look how he's dressed.
And yeah, so they like take the statue down and all the nuns are like riding it. There's a nun like hanging from the ceiling naked. There's lesbian shit going on. It's
there's Father Mignor is up in like the what do you call it? Up near the ceiling of a church, but well, anyway, he's up on a mezzanine.
Yes.
Like frantically jerking off.
Yep.
Like through his robe too. It's so like his expression is so pinched and intent and horrified, and oh, it's so good.
It's so good. And there's a huge audience too watching. Like yep. Everyone in the city is like gathered to watch this happening. And like all the women have like their shaved heads. The extras did have to shave their heads to be nun extras. It's just, and it is the most controversial scene in the movie and arguably the most important scene in the movie. Yeah. It's the culmination of all of Ken Russell's ideas about corruption and sexuality and religion. Mm-hmm. So the Grandier, barges in just as Jean is like strung up with these shackles. And,
right, like a human pendulum.
Yeah, and it's all very sadomasochistic. And right. Grandier barges in and condemns the spectacle, and Madeline defends their marriage, which triggers Jean to send even more accusations out. She's like, I've prostituted myself to Grandier. And he's arrested and tortured. Yeah. And the nuns must sign their confessions or they'll be tortured as well and condemned to hell. And Jean actually tries to hang herself. I assume in guilt. And Grandier prays for his life. Jean is like in feverish in fits. She's bedridden and sweating. She says she wants to make amends with Grandier. Like she's trying to stop the what's happening. But Father Barre will not allow that, of course. And this is when Father Barre
that car's moving at full speed at this point, and she's trying to stop it Flintstone style.
Right. And
there's no way.
Father Barre rapes Jean essentially. As Mignon watches, Grandier lays defeated in his home, surrounded by soldiers, as the Baron destroys his house and teases him.
That torture scene is so intense and meaningful.
Where he's destroying the statues.
Oh, I meant shortly thereafter when they actually start to wedge him, which is... like you fit a limb inside a wooden frame and then you pound wooden wedges into it until the limb is deformed to the breaking point.
Stuff.
And I love that the first thing he says is, "No, I'm certain I shall scream."
Yeah.
He is so sure that his essential nature is weak and rotten, and he's so intent on doing the best he can anyway.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful. It's very like to me, that's what there is of value in Catholic philosophy is in that scene. That like even in an abject state of irredeemable weakness and it's just sort of dereliction, the act of striving is still beautiful.
Right. Which makes a lot of sense because Ken Russell was a practicing Catholic when he made this movie. So
God, that rips so hard.
yeah, so he most likely is trying to convey in the film what are the aspects of this that are worth taking away. And yeah, I mean, all the lead up to that scene as well, you know, Grandier is very dignified and he's put on trial, like his letters and writings are exposed. He's shaved and shackled. Before he's shaved, he asks to see himself in the mirror, which breaks my heart. And mirrors are very significant in this story. And he's found guilty. And, you know, he says he hopes that his suffering to come can atone for his vain and disordered life. And the court descends into chaos as Barre screams, you know, he's like, even in, you know, this is not dignity. Do not mistake it for dignity. And that's when Grandier is tortured and where his legs are smashed with a giant mallet. And that was originally much more explicit. Obviously, the censors kept telling Ken Russell to cut it down. But then what happened was once he cut out all of the explicitness of it, it was more upsetting because you just see his face. So they're like, okay, put some back in.
Yeah.
Because now it's too upsetting.
Right. And it always happens if you give the audience, you know, license to project the movie for themselves inside their own heads. It's going to be worse than anything you've come up with.
Exactly. But he still won't confess, even through all this pain. And they ask him, do you love the church? And he says, not today.
Yes. It's so good.
Which is so good. Grandier, he still won't confess. He's dragged through the crowd to the convent on a wooden cot with this noose around his neck. He's told to atone to the women. He's like, you know, painfully shoved off the cot. He can't walk anymore. And he asks that God forgive the women.
Yeah.
And he also says, look at this thing I am and learn the meaning of love. So the drama of it all. And
it's extremely extra.
I mean, Sister Jeanne is so ashamed, I think, of her actions that she just starts chanting like devil at him and all the nuns go wild.
Yeah, no, you can see her misery before it hardens into rage.
Yes. Yeah, like in real time. And that is the brilliance of Vanessa Redgrave's performance. Grandier is dragged to the pyre. The executioner, this is another part that breaks my heart. The executioner promises to strangle him before he's burned to death. The executioner is so like nice and cheery. And
he's very upset when Barre lights the pyre and does not give him an opportunity to keep his promise.
Yes. He's like, I'm sorry, priest, forgive me. It's so upsetting.
It's really touching. And we also learn in this part that Father Mignot has had a breakdown and is confined.
I forgot about that. Yes.
Like the combination of sexual hysteria and his knowledge that what they are all doing is so wrong has just driven him over the edge.
But he's also still there, right? Because he gives Grandier the kiss.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but you can see the pain in it. So like they're still imploring him to confess. They light the fire, or they haven't lit it yet, but you know, he's like, give me the kiss of peace. And the crowd chants for the kiss. And Mignon kisses Grandier, and then the crowd chants at him that he's Judas. I mean, you just see, like, there's no mercy in the crowd, right? Like, they're not on anyone's side. Like, they just want to show.
They just want to-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the flames are lit. Felipe and her father watch with Grandier's baby, mocking him by saying it's not every day a baby gets to see his daddy burned to death.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like their revenge. Interesting part about this scene, Oliver Reed was hardcore, so he wanted this to actually, like, he wanted to actually be in the middle of a fire so that it would look as realistic as possible. So there was a trapdoor installed under him, but the actual flames, like, sealed it shut, so he couldn't release the mechanism to go through the trapdoor. So he just had to, like, be fake burned at the stake while, like, the crew tried to put out the flames. And that's why we get such an amazing reaction from him, because he is actually afraid. And
God, that's so good.
yeah, and you see him, like, being burned to death. Like, you see the blisters and his
Yeah, the makeup is really incredible.
the makeup's really good. And
he speaks to the crowd about how wrong this is and how he knows it because his own life was so poorly lived.
yeah, and he says, "Look at your
It's
city.
very-
Your city is destroyed."
Right. And then as soon as he dies, they dynamite the walls.
Yeah, as immediately.
Yeah.
And
Well, not dynamite, but they
whatever
explode them.
the medieval equivalent is. And the Baron, he's dead. Baron tells Jean in the convent that now her city will die. And he hands her a charred tibia bone of Grandier's, and John kisses it and falls to the floor. And in the original cut, she has sex with the tibia. So,
Yes, which is such an incredible moment where it's like everything that she inadvertently let out of her, she pushes back into herself.
yep.
Like all of this chaos and violence and consequences that were so far beyond her control, at the end it just folds back into itself.
Yes. The demolition of the city walls has already started, and this haunting final scene where Madeline crawls over the wreckage of one of the walls and walks over it, stumbling away down the path lined with the bodies of dead Protestants, leaving Loudon behind her. And that's The Devils.
Yeah, that whole final scene is a big mood.
Do you have any closing thoughts about, like, Russell himself, it is said while he was working on this movie, didn't even quite know what it was about. Like, he would change his mind every day. Like, oh, this is about persecution and religion. Oh, it's about repressed sexuality, and everybody would just be like, okay, whatever again. And he, like, yeah, I was just wondering if you had any closing thoughts on the film?
I think in the broadest sense, it's about how we learn to live with ourselves as flawed, suffering people, and how that is not a harmless process. Human interaction and connection is destructive and can go wrong so easily. And all of these forces that we think of as manifestly good, like love and desire and duty and loyalty, are all completely neutral and can lead to anything.
Right.
All of these people have learned to live in their broken, fucked up world. And mostly the result is pretty awful.
Right.
But it's also not without grace
and beauty. Yeah. So, wow. Thank you so much for talking about this movie with me.
Thank you for having me on. This was really, I'm always happy to talk about The Devils.
And maybe one day we'll do another Ken Russell movie. So many that would work so well on the show. Where can people find you on social media if you want them to?
I am at Scumbelievable on Twitter. You can find me by my full name there too, Gretchen Falcon Martin. And other than that, my first novel, Manhunt, is coming out from Tor in March of next year.
Amazing. I'm so excited to read it. And Gretchen also has a Patreon.
True.
It's patreon.com/
I think it's just Gretchen Falcon Martin. It's film criticism. Sometimes I post original short horror there. This year, I'm watching a new to me movie every week and writing about it. I did Repulsion last week, and this week I watched The New World by Terrence Malick, which I did not know going in was a Pocahontas love story.
I've never even heard of it.
Oh, it's horrible.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But anyway,
Gretchen
yeah,
is one of
so
the
much
few. Yeah, Gretchen is one of the few Patreons I subscribe to. Sign up. She's got great stuff. And you know where to find me. Girls Guts Giallo, Twitter and Instagram, patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. Thank you, Gretchen. You're the best.